This week on Act Out, we are bringing you a special one-hour episode on the climate march actions that happened in Washington, D.C. this past week and weekend. We're bringing you footage, images, and interviews from the front lines of the fight for people and planet over profit. Perspectives that you may not have considered, stories that you haven't heard from people and communities that you haven't heard of. From North Dakota, from the borderlands of Texas, from Washington State, the Carolinas, California, Utah, from right here in D.C., from the farmer in Pennsylvania to the water protector at Standing Rock, indigenous, undocumented, black, white, young, old, and all that lies in between and beyond. From art spaces to the streets, from government agencies to the White House. It is all about people power and climate justice. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. For those of you familiar with the show and me, you'll know that I'm always wary and easily critical of what my friend Jimmy calls parades, i.e. big, permitted marches that stick to an outlined course, don't really ruffle feathers, and don't get in anyone's way. And I do very much still feel that there's no such thing as powerful and successful activism that doesn't inconvenience anyone. Today was in many ways everything that a parade is, including sections of mishmashed messaging, lines of porta potties, and musical performances at the close. However, that being said, I have a few reasons to not merely cast this past week's actions and today's actions in a critical light. One reason is that marches, or indeed parades like this one, can serve as a powerful inspiration for people in attendance and also those watching from home. And I say can because it's really up to us who are here and those of you who are watching. Do you feel inspired? What are you doing in your communities? What are you doing for climate justice? What will you take away? What will you bring? Events like these can light a fire under our collective asses. They can ignite the soul, much in the same way that being at a huge concert and feeling the crowd all singing the same song can saturate your spirit with a high that no words could describe. It's a feeling of community, a celebration, yeah, a parade of power. It is a potential energy, a platform of possibility made kinetic by our actions after this day. It's a stage set for frontline communities to share their stories, to demand action from allies, to connect the fight of climate change with colonialism, racism, and greed. It's not an appeal to power. It's not a tactic that assumes major shifts in systemic consciousness come next week. It's a meeting of minds, a networking of activists, a coming together of communities, of cultures, a blending of stories and ideas, a red thread through the depths of our climate change reality, an invitation and an inspiration. If couched in this honest light, we can see the climate march for what it really is, and not what we all want it to be, a quick switch to life over oil-soaked suicide. Because there is no quick switch. There is only continued pressure and the pointed promise to be ungovernable and resolute in our protection of the planet and each other. This march is also an affirmation of that promise. So, without further ado, I invite you to see for yourself, to be inspired by the voices and actions of the climate justice movement. And as you watch the footage that follows, I ask you to take something, a piece, a line, a chant, a visual, and use it as a foundation or a continuation of your work for people and planet.
My name is Jamal Gray. I'm a Washington, D.C. native, D.C.-based musician, curator, father, many things. And I'm here as part of the People's Climate Movement. I'm actually organizing the music for the street and some of the music for the stage with the post-march rally that will be happening on the Washington Monument. Music is a powerful force, you know. It's used for healing, it's used for ritual, it's used to connect people. And in a lot of ways, music can cross boundaries, whether it be social boundaries, political boundaries. I mean, if you think about any of the great, like, social movements in our history, there's always a music component. There's always, whether it be songs that are being led, used to lead the movement or the marches itself, or popular musicians who are using their voice to bring light to certain causes. Music is essential when trying to convey messages, I think. So I think personally as a musician, I like to look at the spiritual context, political context, and the human context of creating.
My name is Christine Nobis. I'm Plains Cree Saulteaux of the George Gordon First Nation in Saskatchewan, Canada. I grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I've been living in Iowa for 10 years, and I am the founder of Indigenous Iowa and Little Creek Camp. And I ended up in Iowa to do my master's in religious studies with a focus on Native American religion and a minor in American Indian Native Studies. I guess at some point I was supposed to be a professor, but now it looks like I'm just fighting the man. Like I said, I've been in Iowa for 10 years, and I was at Standing Rock, I think in August, the end of August is when I went for my first time. I spent a lot of time there trying to connect the fight between what's going on in Iowa and Standing Rock, because in Iowa, people have been fighting the pipeline for almost 3 years, actually, well, 2.5 years. So I felt that it was really important to connect what was going on in Iowa with Standing Rock, because it's one pipeline that runs through 4 counties, and I just felt that we needed to be stronger on all fronts, and we needed to work together more, like with the Standing Rock movement and the Iowa movement, because we are essentially fighting for the same thing, for the pipeline not to be implemented. I'll tell you what our camp is, actually. It's a think tank. It's a place to resist this new administration. It's a place to coalesce all of the voices in Iowa that are fighting, basically all the atrocities, just injustice in general. And so it's a place where I'm trying to get people to think about the larger picture and do more together. I'm also trying to, support the indigenous mindset and get that out into the world more, have people understand why it's so important to switch the way we think, why we need to move away from the Christian dogma and the Judaism and Islam, these ways of thinking where God gave man dominion over the land. I mean, these are like intrinsic in us, because we've been socialized since birth to think that we can just do what we want. And this type of thinking leads to capitalism and consumerism, which leads to more and more and more and more, and it just never ends. And so I feel that it's really, at this moment in time, this is a pivotal moment in time, that it's time for the indigenous way of thinking to come to the front, and for people to see that and hear it and feel it, and really try to embrace it. In terms of what's going on with the art installation that I'm here working on with these other indigenous people, I feel like it's a strong message, wagon burning, arrows. The wagon is colonialism. The arrows are how we decolonize. They're strong. It's a strong message, and I'm tired of mincing words. I'm tired of being nice. I'm tired of saying that we don't want retribution, because you know what? Sometimes we do. We went through a genocide not too long ago. We went through a heavy period of colonization. I mean, I don't necessarily want to be nice anymore. I mean, I'm not going to be violent, but I don't necessarily want to be nice either. I just think it's time for people to hear what we have to say in honest terms. Because the truth needs to come out. We need to decolonize our history. We need to decolonize our thinking. We need to decolonize our bodies, our marriages, our kids. I mean, everything around us, the way we live in general, everything is just wrong. And I hope that people can see that with the art installation that I'm here helping Remy on.
And finally, what does that retribution look like to you as an Indigenous person?
I don't know. I don't know. Sometimes I imagine people giving back land. I mean, I guess that would be reparation and sovereignty, right? But sometimes retribution to me is just like white people just waking up and like kind of freaking out because they realize that they're descendants of settlers, you know, of colonial settlers, and just being like, wow, you know, here I am, here's what I have because of what my ancestors did. Maybe it's time to make change. So maybe that's it. Like having them like kind of have that bit of panic that we feel every day and realizing like the precarious situation that we live in.
Our collective's name is Roots of Autonomous Resistance, ROAR, and we chose that name and we chose, you know, the bear, we chose that symbolism because that's what we've been doing for the past few years. We're the ones that have been fighting, we're the ones that have been resisting. When you resist in a place that has a lot of white supremacy, like not only are you resisting like for the earth, you're also resisting for yourself. That's kind of what we do, you know, like.
What's been going on the past 5 years?
Well, so for the past 5 years, we've been occupying and we've been holding it down over at this tar sands camp where basically they're trying to build a tar sands mine out at the Uintas, out at the Book Cliffs. And so you see this place, you know, like you see it and it's so beautiful. There's all these trees, there's these little streams, there's nature, there's the desert, it's the desert. And they're trying to build a tar sands mine there, kind of like away from everything. You almost like, a lot of people tell us, we didn't even know they were trying to build a tar sands mine in the desert. And it's like, it's true, they are. But what people don't realize is that you build the tar sands in the desert, but then where does it get refined? In the refineries. Where are the refineries? In the hoods, in the barrios. So a lot of these things, all of these dots are connected. Environmental racism and poverty and the way that our communities are being poisoned. So not only is the desert being poisoned, then it comes back to our communities. So for the past 5 years, we've been over there shutting it down constantly, consistently. Actions, direct actions, just staying there, you know, showing presence and witnessing, and no one's gonna stand up for our barrios. Like, it's gotta be us. Like, this is literally it. So we made, we went with this theme of Rosa Park Respira, which Rose Park is one of the communities out there, one of the barrios out there. That's like the hood. That's like where the refineries are at. That's where like the people of color are at. And this says breathe, respira. And it's almost like we're saying like a statement, like Rose Park breathes.
Talk about the collective. You were mentioning it's run by indigenous and people of color.
So Roots of Autonomous Resistance started out as this, we would get together, right? We would be like, hey, let's talk, let's hang out after work and let's just talk about what are our needs as like communities of color here. So we would get together and we would just talk and talk and talk, and it grew. It went from like 5 people, 10 people, 30 people, 40 people, and I think what's so beautiful about it is that it's run by people of color. It's run by indigenous people. It's run by queer people of color. It's run by non-binary folks, and it's run by our people. And its whole goal, its whole intentions is autonomous resistance. You know, how are we building autonomy? How are we making sure that we're feeding each other? How are we growing our own food? You know, we talk about like the nopales, we talk about the cactuses. They grow their own fruit. Like, how are we ourselves like making sure that our community is tight? You know, like, yes, those thorns, but also those fruits, and like making sure that we're gonna be okay. Because, you know, people talk about like liberation. But liberation ain't assimilation. Like, that's not what we're about. Like, what we really want more than anything is we want our people represented and we want our folks safe. We're not a nonprofit. We're not trying to campaign. We're not trying to support no politicians. Like, we're literally, all we work on, all we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that we stay alive. Because in this world, to be a queer person of color, to be a queer and undocumented person of color and to be alive, it's kind of like a miracle in its own. It's a magical thing, you know, and that's like, you know, that's my revolution, is keeping myself and my homies alive. Like, that's what we're working on. That's how we're getting free. So what does it mean to focus on a presidency when in reality it's not about the presidency, it's the whole system? And I think that I'm here personally to bring like my message of my community. I'm here personally to deliver that message of like the resilience of the desert communities. And I'm here to bring that back to us too, you know? I'm here to bring it back. I'm here to connect those dots. I'm here to bring like, in a lot of ways, that voice from the desert and saying, you know, like, we out here, like, we're out here too. There's things happening on this land, on this stolen land that people don't even realize. like again, like the tar sands in Utah. Like people forgot all about that, but it's true. It's true. It's been 5 years and we're still here. We're still resisting. We're still fighting. We're still camping out.
According to DAPL Pipeline, or with DAPL Pipeline, 30% of the pipeline goes through Iowa, and I think there's 10 farmers that filed against the Iowa Utilities Board, and with that, we're waiting on a date with the Supreme Court, and that's the other tactic that, or we're moving and still fighting the Dakota Access Pipeline in that manner. We're involved with many organizations out there right now. There's about, I think, 75 people, 25 a day. They're doing an 8-day march, climate march. They started it at our camp in Little Creek, and then they're doing a interstate, not interstate, but interstate march. And they're hitting a lot of small towns. Yeah.
Awesome. So why do you think it's important to be here in DC for this?
I think to strengthen the integration between a lot of us, group members and human beings, and of course to strengthen the awareness with a lot of these issues, to include the climate, consumerism, capitalism, a lot of the isms.
Art is something that can speak louder than just text, and I think that it crosses cultural lines, language lines, borders, all of these things, that all these arbitrary lines that we form. Art is something that can sort of transcend that. In terms of creating spaces like Uptown Art House, I think this is a beautiful space where people can come together and paint a banner together and have conversation. People from Detroit, people from, you know, Kansas, the Dakotas, Texas, and share their stories while making a beautiful piece of art that is a form of resistance. So I think we resist by communicating together and making art together, and then we have the art to then show to the public and say, this is what we made, this is why it's important, and this is the message that we have.
We're addressing colonialism, we're addressing genocide, we're addressing racism, and we're not being shy about it. This administration is not being shy about its blatant racism, and we're not going to be shy about what we're presenting and what we want out of this country. And so this isn't a keep it underground movement. It isn't about solar panels. It isn't about any of these things. It's time to talk about the real issues, about what plagues this country and the premise that it was built on. I mean, even if you look at the Constitution itself, it says in there, merciless Indian savages. And that lets us know that, you know, this country was never meant for us in terms of it building up. It was built upon the genocide of one race and the enslavement of another. And so I think people need to be real about that in terms of history. I know that may not, you know, sit well with a lot of people, but I think that's very reflective of American history and the way it's told, especially in our country. And so I think we get like maybe a chapter and a half in terms of the history of this. So we need to really start addressing the 100 to 140 million indigenous lives that have been exterminated on this very soil. And so when we start addressing these issues, we have to look at the root causes of it. And a lot of it has to do with the westward expansion and colonization and what that's brought to our land in terms of pipelines and in terms of, you know, coal. You look at all of uranium, you look at all this extractive industries. A lot of them were based on reservations with this pure intent of extracting natural resources from us. I know that's the same for our reservation on the Navajo reservation. We're surrounded by 6 coal-fired plants, and that's not by accident, that's by design. And so when we look at Bismarck, they said no to the original pipeline itself. And so what the tribe of Standing Rock had to deal with was being forced to accept what Bismarck denied at gunpoint. As artists, we need to be able to create more than the capacity that society has the will to destroy. And so it's a full-time job. I mean, there's a lot of artists out there that aren't here, but they should be here. They should be in the streets. They should be in the trenches, because as artists, we make the images that people get behind. You know, we're the life and soul of this movement. And so when we have art that represents, you know, us and what we've had to deal with the last 500 years, it's all true to form. It's just an expression of us coming out. And so in terms of marching, me personally, I'm not here to march for anybody anymore. I mean, my people were forced to march to Fort Sumter. And if you look at our history as Navajo people, you know, we've been marching for white people for a long time, and not the best ways. And so until we can get white people who are going to actually stand with us in the streets and challenge power, then why are we coming out to these marches all the time? Like, if we're not challenging power, then what are we doing? We're here for photo ops, we're here for building brands. You know, we got a crisis on our hands, and we need to be doing everything possible. We need all hands on deck, really.
My name is Becca Nahosa. I'm from the borderlands of Texas, and I'm here making art for 3 different movements. One, to help represent the Gulf Coast and also the borderlands. I'm also united with 2 other frontline activists, one from Houston and New Orleans, and together we're creating an art piece that illustrates some of our struggles, particularly around fossil fuel resistance and immigrant rights. I'm also here working on a block that just illustrates all the different fossil fuel movements across the U.S. as we're all converging here in D.C. And I'm also here with a group called Beyond Extreme Energy, and we plan to pressure the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and really call them out for being pretty much a rubber stamp. They've approved virtually every single natural gas project since 1981, except for one.
And why is it important for you to come from the borderlands to be here to talk not only about environmental issues, but about immigration?
Yeah, so these issues definitely intersect. Where I live, it's mostly immigrant communities. We're at a high friction point for colonization because we have the border wall there, we have border patrol, border militarization, and we're also on the front lines of climate change, and we're also in an area that's sacrificed for fossil fuel extraction and exportation. So we've got an intersecting 3 different issues. We're a community that's suffering from that militarization and also being forced to be a sacrifice zone. So I think it's important to show that the connection of those movements and, you know, bring that up to this level up here.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, marching up the freedom way. Ain't gonna let over turn me around, oh no, turn me around, no, no, turn me around. Ain't gonna let over turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the freedom way.
My name's Maggie Henry. I'm an organic farmer from western Pennsylvania that we can no longer farm where we live. The farm's been in my husband's family for over 100 years. We are 5th generation on it. There won't be a 6th unless they just commodity crop it, or I don't know what would happen to it. About 10 years ago, fracking invaded my life, and it quite literally has destroyed everything my husband and I worked our entire lives to build. In 2014, after 6 or 7 years of fighting this, they were fracking about 2 miles from the farm, and they caused a series of 77 earthquakes that literally shattered my basement foundation. When it rains now, water pours down the inside of my basement. They cracked all my drywall, shattered my chimney flue pipe, and made my roof, which was new in 2008, leak. And nobody's responsible for this. Nobody is accountable for it. You try to go to DEP, they send you to the company sends you to DAP. Insurance companies are like, no, that's man-made, we're not doing that. And it's ridiculous. Everything you have invested is gone. The following February, I found 3 animals dead in the pasture field, and like nothing like that had ever happened on the farm before. I have more integrity than to try to call my product organic when I find something like that, and if I don't even want to eat it, I couldn't possibly sell it to my customers as organic, and you know, it wasn't. So everything went to an auction, huge loss, and we fled the farm. I'm here at FERC all the time trying to protest. They rubber stamp all these projects. White supremacy in this country absolutely sucks. This pipeline that we're here today protesting that's going to run through this man's sweet potato farm was originally scheduled to run through a very white county in a very white neighborhood, and they changed it and ran it through a predominantly African American county because that's what they do. If you look at all of the pollution, look at Louisiana and all of those factories down there, and they just dump incredible amounts of pollution on. And the CAFOs in this country, they actually spew manure, and it rains down on people's homes. And they're African American, and it is insane that this goes on and that it's allowed to go on. The America today is not the America of my childhood, and I am really concerned for my grandchildren, for their children. I don't see this as being a positive thing at all. So I was at the Science March, I'm here for the Climate March. People power is the only thing that's going to change this. People have to get off the couch, get in the streets, and start protesting.
My name's Valina, and I live in Washington State. There are a lot of energy projects coming from Washington State, specifically on the coast, which is where I grew up, heading to the Asian markets, and our extraction economy is terrible, and it's not leaving a sustainable future for me, let alone future generations. And it's very disheartening and unfair to watch the people in power destroy things that they will eventually turn over to my generation and say, here you go. And it's difficult to get older and watch that happen more and more. So I'm here because any victory against more extraction, against, you know, the sort of throwing all of our chips into this fossil fuel guzzling economy is a win.
What are you hoping to take away from the march?
It's hard to, my desire to stay well informed is in direct conflict with my ability to stay sane at the moment, and being involved in things like this where there are a lot of people for the same purpose all gathering together with a lot of energy and determination, it really lifts my spirits. It lets me know that I'm not the only one paying attention. You know, I'm not the only one that's trying to fight this good fight. There are a lot of people, and when we all come together, we make something that is remarkable and powerful.
To continue to pollute our water, both surface and groundwater, make our soil inhabitable for producing the best of crops, and killing us off by not investing more in renewable energy like solar and wind. To continue to run pipelines across this country that are not safe, and in communities where people have the least resistance or the least power to stop them, is racism, economic devastation, and environmental injustice. So we have to make a stand for what we need in our communities and to keep our way of life and to keep our soils productive, not to impact negatively our rivers where we fish and our groundwater where most of us are still on well water.
So talk about specifically what's happening in your area of North Carolina.
Well, in Halifax, the pipeline, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, is poised to come through there, and going through primarily African American communities. And with our current legislative body that's making all kinds of crazy rules and regulations, that it's most important that we speak out and let them know that this will not work and that we're not going to sit peacefully by and allow it to happen. Not only are our voting rights being suppressed, but our right to life is being suppressed.
So what would you say to people about the situation right now? What do people need to do?
The only power to stop corporate America and our government is people power. We need people to understand that even though you may not be impacted because it's not in your backyard right now, but ultimately you will be impacted as global warming continues, and all of us will suffer from the devastations that are occurring through that.
Climate change is impacting some of the most vulnerable communities. People of color, low-income communities, indigenous communities are being hit first and hardest by the impacts of the climate crisis. And so, as we seek to address climate change, it is also an opportunity and a moral imperative to take care of the communities that are going to be most deeply hurt by this, who already don't have the resources to respond.
And what is the Reinvest campaign?
So the DC Reinvest campaign is a response from a national call by indigenous leaders at Standing Rock and elsewhere to defund the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Keystone XL Pipeline. We are trying to move our money out of banks that are investing in these pipelines. In DC, our main target is Wells Fargo. We are demanding that DC divest from Wells Fargo in order to demonstrate that it does not stand with targeting indigenous people, with violating indigenous sovereignty, and with funding dirty infrastructure that pollutes our air and contributes to climate change.
My name is Jeremiah Lowery, and I'm with the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. I'm here because here in Washington, D.C., we still have issues with lead in the water, lead in the public housing water, lead in the school water. We still have issues around the fact that our air is being polluted by dirty fossil fuels. We still have issues around rising energy prices here in Washington, D.C. We still have so many different environmental injustices, and that's the reason why, as a D.C. resident, I got up in the morning and I'm ready to march, I'm ready to go. Here in Washington, D.C., with KANE, we're going to put a fee on the carbon pollution emitted by some of the biggest polluters in the district, give the majority of that fee back to D.C. residents, as well as make sure some of that fee goes into reinvesting into energy efficiency and renewable efforts, renewable energy efforts here in Washington, D.C.
I'm DESIREE KANE from Denver, Colorado. I'm a member of the Indian Problem, which is a indigenous nonviolent direct action trainers collective. This was built by my cohort Remy, as well as a number of other folks. And it's basically an expression of what indigenous people find on their doorsteps every day. Pipelines, both the prison pipeline, the deportation pipeline, the sex trade pipeline. All of these pipelines are fueled by the root causes that also cause the Dakota Access Pipeline and Keystone XL.
We are with the Okeanos Foundation for the Sea, and we are marching with Pacific Islanders. That's why we have this canoe, because the Pacific Islands are on the front line of climate change. We also are representing the indigenous knowledge of traditional sailing, which is 100% green. It's totally fossil fuel free. We've built canoes in the Pacific that are being used as clean energy for transport within the Pacific Islands, all based on indigenous knowledge. So we feel that bringing the past into the future is a really great way to help prepare for and help combat against climate change.
My name is Joanna Vicente. I am here with Chispa Maryland of the Maryland League of Conservation Voters. I'm here with our community, Latino community from PG County, and we're here because our communities are often carry the burden of climate change, and we want justice, and we want justice for our communities. We want communities that are clean. We want to have our kids be able to go outside and not worry about whether they will be able to breathe or not. We want justice, and that's why we're here.
We're standing up for the environment, for the water, and asking this government to honor the earth and the water, to make better judgments on how we preserve our lives. Because without water, there is no life. So many wachoni.
My name is Marnie Halassa. I'm an activist. I actually have a protest consulting group called Revolution is Sexy. And what we do is we take theatrical protests for activists and political groups, and we get media attention. So hence, here's my pink flamingo monstrosity, what the flock, stop climate chaos. And I'm just here because I'm terrified. I feel like Trump is like rolling back regulations that would, you know, protect the planet, and I just feel like this is like a very, very urgent situation that we all should come out and show support. I'm from New York City, so I came with a group of friends to protest, and I feel inspired, and hopefully it'll work, because political protest works.
Keep
I'm here because I have my own nonprofit called Epic Animals that teaches kids about endangered animals, but not only that, it teaches them how to make a change and how to speak up for what they believe in and to take legislative action. And I really, really care about the environment, so I wanted to protest. And actually, just last summer we went to the Arctic, and so I saw firsthand what was happening there. And it's something that really matters a lot to me, so I came.
Wow, how old are you?
I'm 10.
My name is Michael Harris. I'm here with Southern University. I'm here representing the original people of Earth. Basically, what we're doing, why we're here today, we're protesting poor environmental conditions in urban areas. We're located in North Baton Rouge. Even though Baton Rouge is a capital of Louisiana, North Baton Rouge is still predominantly a food desert. We have to go miles upon miles to just find fresh food. The only grocery store by our campus or in North Baton Rouge is in Baker, and that's really far away from everyone. So no one in North Baton Rouge pretty much has access to fresh food or just healthy eating, and that kind of plays a part in the lifestyle that these people lead. The high crime rates, the poor education, high recidivism rates, because when you constantly putting something poisonous into your body, it's going to cause poisonous thoughts, which is going to lead to poisonous actions, which is the state of the people that are in these low-income areas today. So I feel like if you were to change the environment, starting off with taking away some of these chemical plants, putting more agriculture around them, just beautifying their neighborhood and giving them access to fresh food, you'll really turn their communities around. And that's basically what we out here for, because like I said, Southern University, we're in the heart of North Baton Rouge. There's no hospital there, there's no grocery stores, nothing. We're kind of in a barren wasteland, despite the fact that a large populace of our citizens is located in North Baton Rouge. And what's going on in Baton Rouge, in North Baton Rouge, isn't just going on in North Baton Rouge. I'm sure it's going on in DC, it's going on in Houston and Atlanta. So what we're here doing is just spreading awareness to this issue, because it's a big issue.
I think there's a lot that goes on in my head when I think about liberal mass mobilizations that are called on and led by large nonprofit NGOs. And I was having a conversation earlier today with some other folks who understand that struggle too, and it kind of comes down to once an organization becomes big enough, it no longer is defending or advocating or taking action for the issue it was maybe established to deal with, and it's really defending its existence instead of greater, broader, larger existence with a capital E. And that was just played out pretty much as expected. At least in DC, I've gotten plenty of reports from other folks that are in other cities that had their own climate marches, and it was pretty much a reiteration of 2014. Could be considered a reiteration of many of the other marches that have happened in the last year or so, or even in the last few months, to be honest, following that same kind of top-down model of activation, but not necessarily action.
So, I mean, it would potentially be possible, I guess, to get 200,000 people who all believe in sort of like a flat structure, anti-capitalist path to come to DC. But you're never actually going to get all of those people that believe in that path to come to DC. And then the further question is, do you need to?
I think I can't really answer whether we actually need it or who we actually is either. But in terms of the appearance of mass mobilization, the appearance of many people that are apparently there for some purposes important, but when that purpose hasn't been or is not the culmination of deeper organizing and dismantling in like localized communities, like decentralized like autonomous structures, not just deferring to the biggest NGO or the one that's taking up the most space, at least in terms of media and social media. I think that mass mobilization is perfectly fitting when it's appropriate, but I feel like we're falling kind of victim to what we remembered maybe, or what some people in older generations are remembering as being turning points. And that was, oh, we just need to get a bunch of people in the streets marching and that'll change things. But what they're ignoring, and this happens regularly in white supremacy neoliberal organizing spaces, is that there were hundreds and thousands of people involved on the ground, struggling and trying to mend and build relationships with one another throughout all of this going forward. And the marches and bigger events were, again, culminations of people becoming more activated. It wasn't perfect, but again, it's not sort of part of white supremacy culture not to have something entirely perfect and entirely unified and unitary, so that you're actually ignoring some of the very specific details that make a movement strong and that make a struggle relevant to not just the bigger picture NGO versus corporation framework. Because again, I think we've talked about this before, how nonprofits exist in many ways in direct balance with, not in opposition to, sometimes direct balance with industry exploitation. So if that industry exploitation crashes, in theory, I would love to expect and think that these organizations and nonprofits are trying to get themselves out of work. They actually want their own institutions to crumble, because ultimately it's like, if you do that because you no longer have opposition, I think that's a good thing. But you don't see that being played forward. You don't see that being part of the goals and structures and agendas, or even sort of an exit strategy. It would be great to see within the coveted principles documents and organizational documents that, yeah, so the whole point here is that we want to end the fossil fuel empire. And once that happens, we're dismantling ourselves and considering other options for organizing together. But you don't see that, because they're just as persistent as the corporate personified entities that exist currently.
And they have like you said, they have the same top-down hierarchical structure. It's not a flat structure that takes into consideration the communities on the ground. That was another thing that I noticed, like just some things that popped up to me when I was down there. First of all, they had these marshals that were at the front of the march. And so there was media right in front of the front line. And then there were marshals that were blocking off everybody else. And they were asking for press credentials for you to get into the little media bubble. And then, of course, the other thing, which I've noticed on mass marches since I was a kid, is, 5 blocks north of these 200,000 people, there are people that are going to stores and having lunch and are completely oblivious to the fact that there's a mass mobilization happening just a few streets down.
For sure.
So it seems like it's sort of a way for, and I guess maybe that's not necessarily always a bad thing, for people to come together and share ideas and network, but it does end up feeling like kind of like an echo chamber. Like, hey, let's all get together and have a party in the street, as opposed to let's actually show a strong force of resistance here.
Sure. Well, and that's why I regularly call it a parade, and I know that I've gotten some heat from people that are part of maybe some of the organizing of it too. But it's like, if we're talking about what it is and sort of what it's being modeled off of, you're not challenging power. You're not shutting down without a permit streets. You're not actually inconveniencing many people. One of the things that I did, because I was in DC supporting those who were kind of drawn into this masterpiece of NGO-dom. And so I was able to provide some logistical support for folks. And I wanted to kind of see how much the march itself impacted the rest of DC. And once you get 1 or 2 blocks away, it's traffic as usual, because it was so well isolated and corralled that it's really easy to ignore it if you are not within that echo chamber that you referenced earlier. So it's one of those things that keeps happening over and over again. And honestly, I feel that the compliance that is being trained from this process on a mass level will only serve to undercut any type of even semi-revolutionary behavior in people that have been, quote unquote, like awakened from the Trump administration now being in existence. So it's very challenging.
And that was the other point that I thought was irritating on some level, was that there was so much focus on Trump. And as far as I know, he wasn't even home. But even if he had been in the White House, this sort of like turning to the White House and having a moment where you yell at Trump, as it were.
Like every time you go to the White House, you're legitimizing a corrupt system. You're legitimizing white supremacy culture. In this case, you're legitimizing like a media mogul, failed business personified Donald Trump. So Cheeto Pendejo. And it's kind of fascinating to me how that's the go-to place still. This is even in direct opposition to Trump being less than 3 hours away in Harrisburg, apparently. But again, you would know this from anybody that was a part of the climate march, like media focus talking about, if we're actually going to visit the White House and the person that we're targeting isn't going to be there, how would it be to ship it to Harrisburg and shut the entire city down? Because with that number of people unannounced, it would have shut Harrisburg down. You wouldn't have to do very much either. You wouldn't have to engage in civil disobedience to shut the city down. So that type of thing is not part of the critical analysis, and also not within the agenda or experience of NGOs to do. They're just not agile enough to do it, and they also honestly I don't feel that as an organization structure, because they're so big that they can't be like individualized the same way. Fixation on fundraising and branding, and could be even as something like, we need to make sure that the exact word and color is associated with this message. Otherwise, people are not going to listen anymore, which there's probably some science and metrics to that, but at the same time, it's like you're micromanaging a movement into ineffectiveness. And I've seen that within big business as well as small business, for profit corporations and small companies too. And that mentality is super destructive across the board, because it makes it so there can't be full participation. There can't even be semi-participation from folks that may be the most impacted.
So finally, before I let you go, where are you right now? What's happening like on the actual front lines here that people need to be made aware of?
And so this is the other part of it too. So also within a 3-hour drive of DC, there is a camp set up in Huntingdon County called Camp White Pine that has been established in opposition to the Sunoco Logistics Energy Transfer Partners project, the Mariner East 2 pipeline. And this is an example again of, if there was even a fraction of a percent of the number of people that kind of just showed up for like a day parade in DC or any number of other larger cities too, this would be a game changer across the board for so many frontline struggles. So I'm here currently offering whatever I can in support of, again, I would consider it largely ignored by NGOs, and the ones that have stepped forward and tried to put on the best act they could. It's hard for me to even put this in words. Put on the best act in saying that we want to support your direct action in terms of what you're doing here, because this camp is oriented around trees that have been saved from a clear cutting process of this pipeline company. And there is an amazing video that came out from the setup that is going on here, which is just brilliant and amazing, and probably the largest, most elaborate tree sit on the eastern seaboard, as far as I know, and basically have been unsupported in terms of even social media and around fundraising issues, in fact. So if they can't make money off of it, the NGOs oftentimes won't help, even though largely they say that's what they're there to do. And so whatever people can do in terms of supporting their local resistance, or even the struggles that are specific to solidarity movements, because this is again part of the larger resistance to energy transfer partners through the kind of the newly initiated or reinitiated Stop ETP campaign, which involves like the Bayou Bridge project that has been proposed for Louisiana bayous, the Bayou Bridge pipeline that would carry the same oil from the Dakota Access Pipeline from North Dakota, as well as other projects that are that are not oil specifically. So pretty much trying to, there's a dog here, trying to five dogs here, specifically trying to interrupt and dismantle any of this process would be a great start. And so far, we're just sort of caught in the systems process for getting us to fail. And as soon as people realize that we're not going to comply anymore, we're not going to comply to a march either, no matter how many large climate organizations are telling us that's what we need to do to win, we can start organizing together again. This is not a collaborative experience by and large. The only People's Climate March experience that was more radical was the Uptown Art House where we met up because of the grassroots leadership involved. And that's definitely a very pronounced lesson that most of the people that showed up in DC for will never know about because it is about the smaller group, decentralized organizing, and then figuring out how to collaborate from there as opposed to having a command structure from up top.
And that'll do it for this week's special dose of dissent. Thank you so much for watching. You guys too. Please spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. Feel free to reach out to us and let us know what your takeaways were, what inspired you, what your fight is, and how you want to wage it. And as always, for more frequent news and activist updates, be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. From the Devil's Den, the home of capitalist idiocy and greed, from the momentary reprieve in the swarms of people power, from the hottest April on record, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, donate at Occupy.com/donate. If you'd like to donate directly to Act Out, visit Patreon.com/actout.